who that is. My guess is that's Tracy. I'm not on twice. All right. Tim, I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlin. I appreciate you guys having me on. Just wanted to share a little bit of information and some tips and tricks around leasing. Um, for any of you that I met a couple of weeks ago at your team meeting, nice to see you again. We're going to be sending out this deck at the end, so don't feel like you've got to take a bunch of screenshots. Lastly, feel free to interrupt as we go and ask any questions, especially with a small group. Let's just keep this informal and hopefully this can be educational for everybody. I am going to start sharing. Is everybody seeing my screen okay? Perfect. All right. So let's start with just a little bit of verbiage. When I say accidental landlord, what do I mean? So those of us in the property management space, we generally think of rental property owners in one of two camps. You've got your accidental landlords. That's somebody that often lived in a house and, their life situation has changed, and for whatever reason, it's not a good time to sell and they decide to lease it. Maybe you inherited a house. Maybe you got married and you had two houses, but you didn't really buy this property with the intention of leasing it out. And then you have what we'd call like an intentional investor, of someone that said, "Hey, I went out there, I bought this property 100% to lease out. It's going to be an income property." Uh, Over the last 2 years or so, most of the new rental inventory that's been coming on the market has been accidental landlords. So those people with, sub 3% mortgages that don't want to get rid of their house. Maybe somebody bought in the peak in 21, 22, and they're underwater on it now. And they're like, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and lease it out for a few years before I sell it. Uh, those are accidental landlords. It's a big growth in the business right now. A lot of accidental landlords have a very different framework and mindset when it comes into leasing than an intentional investor, and would just love to share some of the questions that I get frequently from new management clients, especially those accidental landlords, as we talk through what is it like to become a rental property owner. So what are our top 10 tips that we're going to talk about today? Tenant selection, leasing, rent collection, setting the right tone, repairs, LLCs, insurance, taxes, income, and capital gains. And last but not least, certainly the most important, hire a property manager. So quick quiz before we get started. What do these people and companies all have in common? John Jacob Astor, Henry Flagler, McDonald's, Jeff Bezos, Roger Staubach.
Property acquisition?
Lots of property. John Jacob Astor, I'm a history major, so I love going for the old stuff. He bought up a good chunk of Manhattan. He owned about 5% of it in the early 1800s. When he died, his fortune in today's dollars, we've got $750 billion. Henry Flagler ran a rail line into Florida. He basically was responsible for all the development of the Atlantic coast of Florida and into Miami and Palm Beach when it was just all a swamp. McDonald's, I'm a sucker for McDonald's breakfast, sausage biscuit, hash brown. That's my jam. They're really not a restaurant business. They're a real estate company. They own all of the building and all of the land of all, I think, 16,000 McDonald's restaurants worldwide. They generally have more stable income from leasing out that restaurant to a franchise operator than they necessarily do on their food. Uh, Jeff Bezos, right? We all know Amazon. We see the blue trucks everywhere. He's in about the top 15 of landowners in the US now. He owns 462,000 acres of land across the US. Roger Staubach, any Cowboys fans? Kind of a little depressing. His final NFL salary in 1979, $179,000 a year. Not what we think of as a rock star NFL player today. But he's built a $600 million net worth through real estate after retiring at $179,000 a year. So uh, I'm a big believer in real estate as part of your wealth creation strategy. These five, guys, gals, people certainly did as well. Uh, while a lot of accidental landlords get into the business accidentally, I think they can be converted into an intentional investor and a great legacy client for you that will continue to buy over and over again. I got started in leasing management in 2009, similar time period, and that there were a lot of accidental investors, a lot of people that couldn't sell their house after the Great Recession and decided to lease it out. A lot of those are still clients of ours today. I'm a big believer when we do our job well and make managing and owning rental property easy, uh, investors or accidental landlords can become intentional investors if they realize the benefit of real estate to their long-term wealth creation strategy. All right, so let's talk those top 10 tips for the accidental landlord. This is somewhat assuming they're going to go at it on their own, maybe have your help as a listing agent to lease the house for them, but they're going to self-manage and try to DIY this thing. Very important, set and publish your approval criteria before you list a home for lease. You don't want to be making these decisions on the fly with your landlord. I can guarantee you, for those of you that haven't done any lease listing, you're going to get that question. And I hate hypotheticals, but they are entertaining. Yeah, I have a client that's got a 570 credit score, and he's a great guy, and he's got 7 pit bulls. What do you think? Would your landlord take him? Uh, you want to have those discussions with your landlord before you list the home. 2 reasons, A, it'll make your life easy. The second, Texas Property Code requires that if you do not publish the application criteria and you reject someone, you have to refund their application fee. The perspective is it's not fair to them that they spent 50, 75, $100 on application fees and yet got rejected when they didn't know the rules of the game going in. So make sure you publish that. That could be an attachment in the MLS. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. I believe TAR has like a model tenant approval criteria that you can download. 3 big factors: look at credit score, look at income, look at criminal history. Pretty common rule of thumb in the business is you want to see 3 times the rent in gross monthly income. So if you have a $2,000 a month rental, you want to see that the applicants make at least $6,000 a month gross, pre-tax. So total on their paycheck, not take home.
Tim, I'll
Um,
just add that our brokerage has a policy that they've got to use Rent Spree or some kind of other screening application program that stipulate the rental criteria. So
Awesome. That's great. Rent Spree is a great option for agents and owners that aren't doing property management day to day, that gives you access to screening criteria and tools. Tips more for landlords. If you're using Rent Spree, it doesn't sound like it's a problem, but I can't tell you how many people have said, well, have told me I just like to meet with them. I want to interview my tenants. I'm a good judge of character. I don't need a screening tool. Don't do that. Don't ask for photos of the applicants. Just be very careful. One of your biggest risks for you and your landlord around tenant screening is fair housing. And I know everybody's been trained on that, but this is probably their riskiest issue. Fair housing doesn't come up a ton in sales, but it comes up a lot in leasing. Uh, the big 7 for fair housing, that's federal and state, but we also have some localities in the markets that we operate in that have additional protected classes. So within the city limits of Austin, student status is a protected class. You cannot discriminate on someone, so you couldn't say, hey, I don't rent to UT students. I don't rent to Texas State students. Don't pass go, don't collect $200, go straight to jail. You've got to use that same set of screening criteria. Veteran status is a protected class in San Antonio and I believe New Braunfels as well. So each area that you operate in may have some overlays on top of the federal protected classes.
and Courtney asked a question about driver's
Okay.
license are okay. And I said, yes, we always need to verify ID. So
Yes, I almost put a little asterisk there. We always ask for a copy of a government ID. We want to make sure we know who it is. Uh, if it's black and white, that's fine. I'd almost not want to see the picture, but that's we do want to verify identity for sure. I would not give that to your landlord. If I was a listing agent, that's part of your job. You validate it that yes, this is the person that they are who they're saying they are, but only present to your landlord for approval what you've agreed to ahead of time in terms of credit score, income level, criminal history. So the conversation would be, uh, hey, Mr. Landlord, great, I've got an applicant. It's 2 people. It's not a man and a woman, a married couple. We've got 2 people. We've got a credit score of 660 and 680. Household income is, $9,000 a month, which is 4x your gross monthly rent. No criminal history. They want to move in next week. Let's approve them. And anymore like, well, are they married? How old are they? Do they have kids? That kind of stuff, just shut it down. Certainly, if they're self-managing, give them the copy of the driver's license after you make the approval decision. Um, but you want to give them just the pertinent information to make a decision. Let's see, got a couple more questions. San Marcos, yes, there are some restrictions around San Marcos that they basically try to keep students out of single family neighborhoods and limit uh, the number of people from outside of a family. I'm really surprised nobody's taken me to court on that, but that's just another example. You really need to know your local market and know what kind of ordinances are in place. Um, I'm I understand the rationale behind the San Marcos ruling. I mean, what they don't want is a single family neighborhood to have, 4 or 5 college students stacked in there, and there's not space for parking on the street or in the driveway, and it disrupts the character of the neighborhood. Uh, One of the things we do here at HRE when we're approving to help somewhat mitigate that type of thing is we will only count the income from the top 2 earners in an application group. I don't care if it's a married couple. I don't care if it's a roommate. I don't care if it's 3 or 4 grown adults. The top 2 earners have to qualify on their own. That will generally weed out some students. It'll weed out groups of like, hey, there's 5 20-something bartenders that are going to be, coming back into Kissing Tree at, 3 in the morning and waking up all their neighbors when they get off work. Um, so there are ways you can somewhat have an impact on who's going to come into your house based on screening criteria that will meet what they will pass muster. Uh, Neil asked, common question from landlords. I only want to rent to families. That's a big no-no. Familial status, that's a protected class. Um, I don't want to, step on anybody's toes here and tell you what to do or not do and far as brokerage, but if one of our clients comes to that and says, that's their position, ultimately, if I can't make them see the wisdom of following our advice, I'm like, I can't work with you. I'm sorry. That's a violation of fair housing and it's an ethical challenge for me and I'd lose my license. And I'm not going to go there immediately. I'm going to try to explain to them why I think it's a really bad idea. But if they're stuck on that position, I'm going to walk away. You know, there, there's no amount of commission dollars in the world, especially on a lease, that's worth getting involved in a situation like that. Um, what are those talking points I would use with them? Of, you care about someone that's going to pay on time and take care of your property. That's really what matters to you as a landlord. We're not the social or moral police. Ultimately, we want them to pay and take care of your house. And, we're going to find who can do that. And if we start putting gates or limits on who we're willing to accept, even if those limits were legal, this is a business. Why are we trying to narrow our potential applicant pool, especially in a soft leasing market? I get a similar question about pets a lot. Our policy is we do accept pets on every property we manage, and we'll take up to 4 pets. And I get a fair number of landlords that are uncomfortable with that. And I can generally, throw out some facts of, hey, over 60% of households in the Austin metro area have pets. So do you really want to cut 60% of your addressable market out right away? The number one reason, like survey data, that people move from an apartment to a single family home is space and space for pets. Um, and so we're either really cutting our market or we're encouraging people to lie and sneak a pet in without paying a pet deposit and without screening. And lastly, I'm doing this for a long time. Kids cause a hell of a lot more damage than pets. I wish I could charge a kid deposit if that was legal, but it's not. So, have fun with it. Let your landlord know that you know the state of the market. But yeah, anytime someone is hinting around at those protected classes, that's a pretty quick one-way exit button for me. Okay, leasing. So we have 2 great leases in Texas, the TAR or the TAA lease. So Texas Association of Realtors and the Texas Apartment Association, those both publish leases. They're available for use by their members. They're the most common in the state. Uh, I've been to court, I don't know, more times than I can count, more times than I can remember. The JPs, the judges and justice of the peace courts, which are the ones that hear landlord-tenant matters, evictions, deposit disputes, they all know these two leases. They don't need to guess. They don't need to look through all these clauses. They can almost give you legal advice because they're like, yeah, paragraph 18 is about repairs. They're not having to relearn and study your lease when they're trying to, do a cattle call of, a typical eviction docket. There's probably 30 cases in 2 hours. They need to move quickly. And when you submit that lease with the TAR logo at the top, the judges know it. They know it's a legitimate lease. They know it follows the law. They know it follows Texas property code. And you're not going to get bogged down in the details. If a tenant says, well, I paid, but I didn't pay late fees, the judges know exactly where the application of funds provision is in that lease. It's updated every 2 to 4 years. It's got very landlord friendly terms. If you do, if you're a rental property owner or property manager long enough, it's not a win. It's an if. Sorry, it's not an if. It's a win. You wind up in court. Using this lease will save you time and money. The one watch out for the agents. The TAR lease has a copyright provision at the very end that basically says if this lease was not prepared by a licensed agent and a member of TAR, it is voidable at will by the tenant. So if you want to just, say, hey, Mr. Landlord, I know you're going to advertise your house on Facebook Marketplace. I'm not going to be involved. Here's my blank copy of the lease from Zip Forms. Your landlord writes that up. Tenant could just decide to terminate the lease without penalty at any time. So I would not just hand over that lease, not because you're trying to protect anything, but you're putting the landlord at risk if they use that without your involvement. It can be entertaining sitting in court and hearing a lot of these self-managed landlords and the leases they found on, at Office Depot or a Zillow lease or anything else, and just some of the, provisions. It's going to create a big mess. Yeah, some of the clients use the lease provided with Zillow. I would not. I mean, that's not a Texas specific lease. It's not going to be in compliance with Texas property code. There's a lot of little nuances, even the TPC has sections that, if you need to enforce a given provision, the font has to be at least 12 points and has to be bolded. There's a reason the lease looks like that, the way it does, and it's to be in compliance with Texas property code. Is a Zillow lease going to be good in like 90% of cases? Yes. But those 10% or 5% of cases where there's disputes and you end up in court, you end up with a trash document that likely is not in compliance with our state laws. All right, rent collection. So assuming you're using a TAR or TAA lease, there's a section where you can indicate how you're going to accept rent. Pick one method. Especially as a self-managing landlord, pick a method. If that's Zelle, if that's Venmo, if that's a check mailed somewhere, your one preferred. And then I would always recommend offering the option of a non-computerized rent payment to make sure you don't run afoul of any fair housing issues, right? Is there a world where someone could make an age discrimination complaint and said, hey, I don't have a computer. I don't know how to use those apps, and that's the only way that they're saying they're going to take rent from me. The lease does allow you to charge a processing fee. So set that fee to encourage the behavior you want. ACH payments are always free with us. It costs me a little bit of money, but that's why I want people to pay. You want to bring a money order into our office, you're going to pay for that privilege, right? So you can set your terms to encourage the behavior that you want. I would generally avoid like a Venmo or a Zelle or a Cash App. There are a lot of free or very low cost apps that will give you like a rent collection ledger. It's going to keep your personal transactions separate from lease transactions. So if you do end up in court, you've got a nice clean payment history that you can show a judge, and you're not scrolling through, well, yeah, ignore giving my son money for pizza and ignore me paying the lawn care. There's the payment from the tenant. Just try to keep things as separate as possible. Don't accept credit cards, even with the tenant paying all the processing fees. I hear horror stories from fellow PMs all the time. Most credit card companies, you have up to 6 months to initiate a chargeback. You've got a problematic tenant, they're paying rent every month with a credit card, they leave the day after they move out, they initiate a chargeback, and all of a sudden you have 4 months of rent gone, sucked out of your account. Good luck getting that back. Uh, Security deposits, this is probably one where I see owners are universally non-compliant. Is that money legally does not belong to an owner. That belongs to the tenant until they have done something that caused you to deduct it. So when they've left unpaid rent, they've left the house and caused damages, that's when the money would effectively get legally transferred from the tenant to the owner. But until that happens, that money belongs to the tenant and it should not be commingled with the owner's funds. So it should be kept in a separate checking account. Always, always, always charge late fees, NSF fees. They're written in the lease for a reason. We'll talk about kind of managing tenant behavior here in a minute. Um, Late fees, there's something called a safe harbor provision. The legislature passed it 5 years or so ago. Late fees are not meant to be punitive. You're not punishing your tenants for paying late. The reason you are unable to collect a late fee is that landlords incur certain costs with a late check. Maybe they have to spend more time calling someone, maybe they have to send a certified letter, maybe their mortgage company charges them a late fee. But I see a lot of self-managing landlords put in some very punitive late fees that really have no relation to the actual cost of collecting rent late. It's very hard to prove, yeah, hey, you paid late, and as a result, it cost me X number of dollars in extra time and headache. So a few years ago, the legislature passed what's known as a safe harbor provision that says if you cap your late fees at 12% of monthly rent for a single family home, 10% for multifamily, like an apartment, we're going to assume that you're operating in good faith and you're operating legally. They're not saying that it's legally capped at 12%. If your late fees end up being 25%, they're saying you could have to prove if a tenant sued you why it cost you 25% of 1 month's rent to accept late rent. That's not a fight you want to get into, so cap your late fees at 12% of 1 month's rent. If you wanted to set 12% on the fourth, the first day, I mean, they could do that. If you want to do a mix of a first day and a daily, you could do that, but that total amount of late fees that you're going to charge should not exceed 12% of 1 month's rent. Setting the right tone. This is probably should have been number one, but I was thinking through the life cycle of a kind of a relationship and a discussion, and especially if you're going to self-manage, this is a business relationship and you have to treat it as such from day one. The tenants are going to respond the way you treat them. And if you start asking for favors, if you start acting casual, it's giving them license and permission to do the same thing. So let's say you have a landlord moving out of the house, and I hear this all the time. Well, I'm just going to leave my old beat up patio furniture outside because the tenants might like that. They might want to use my trashy furniture that I don't want to pay to haul the dump. Uh, or hey, I'm gonna, I got an auto delivery from cat food, dog food, whatever, showing up every month. I don't want to go change the address. I don't want to send a mailing change address with the post office. So I'm just going to keep a mailbox key and I'm going to go every few days and check my mail, and will you leave my package out on the door for you? No. This is the tenant's house. uh, you want to treat it as a business relationship. uh, the more favors you ask for them, like I said, they're going to ask you for the same. Um, Follow the lease all the time. Late fees, if someone has a question of, hey, it's the fifth, great. Glad to hear you're paying rent today. Here's your total balance due. Rent plus your late fee, your balance due is $2,100 today. Here's where you can send it. There's nothing that says you have to be rude. Uh, Tell your clients, I mean, be polite, be professional, but follow the lease and enforce the lease. Uh, Create a free Google Voice number. Don't give out your personal cell phone number. It's a good idea for your owners to not have that information. Uh, Communicate during business hours, respond promptly, don't get into too much personal stuff. If the tenants ask for an exception, just refer back to the lease. Hey, we signed this document. We both agreed to certain things. I'm agreeing that I'm going to make repairs on a timely basis, that I'm going to allow you to use this house. You're agreeing that you're going to pay rent on time. We both have our obligations that we have to maintain. Um, I Probably one of the biggest reasons we're hired from a self-manager that decides they want professional property management. It all comes down to right here. So, well, I'd let the tenant pay late a few times and now they owe 2 months of rent. Yeah, I never collected late fees. They pay when they want to pay. It's all comes down to the setting the tone. And most of those tenants were able to, save and rehab. They realize there's a new sheriff in town. And when we enforce the provisions of the lease and treat this as a professional business relationship, the tenants start acting like they should. All right, repair requests. Per the lease and Texas Property Code, requests have to be in writing. Set your method in the lease, whether that's an email, a text, a portal. Uh, so legally, you want it to be in writing. The reason is there are a lot of time constraints around the repair request. You don't want to get yourself in trouble of a he said, she said, when did this repair request come in? I always think it's a great idea, quickly acknowledge and provide the tenant next steps. So, I heard your AC isn't working. GNS Mechanical, the vendor, will be contacting you to schedule an appointment. Just think how you want to be treated. Everybody's probably rented at some point in their life. You don't want it to be a black hole. Just tell them, yes, I heard you, and here are next steps. Landlord is not required under Texas Property Code to make repairs if a tenant has unpaid rent. That's a very easy lever to use. The tenant says, hey, yeah, my dishwasher is not working. Well, sorry, Mr. Tenant, you haven't paid rent. Maybe it's only the second of the month. You haven't paid rent. As soon as you get that rent paid, we'll take care of getting this work order dispatched for you. This is another one where a lot of self-managers fall down on the job, at least legally. There has to be a phone number in the lease that's answered 24/7, 365 to handle maintenance emergencies. If you're self-managing and you're at the draft house watching a movie, silenced your cell phone, and there's a water leak or a sewage backup, what's going to happen for a few hours? You're on vacation or it's 2 in the morning. That is not just a good business practice, but a legal requirement in Texas to have that emergency phone call being answered. Another big one, for a landlord, especially that's moved out of a house, they're all things, and I have them in my house, like things that I just, over time they've stopped working, and it's like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm used to it. Uh, Stove has 4 burners, 3 of them are fine. How often do I need all 4? The kitchen sink drain drips, but I leave a bucket under it and I empty it out every week. I take showers, not baths. Who cares if the bathtub is cracked? You're leasing out the home. You don't get to decide that the tenant should accept that some things work and some things don't. Everything needs to be functional in the home. Generally, you have 7 days to make a repair. Texas Property Code says a reasonable amount of time. The presumption is 7 days unless there are big issues with labor and parts availability. That isn't your availability of, hey, I'm on vacation, I'll get to it when I get back in 2 weeks. It's, this air conditioner requires a specialty part and we've ordered it and it's going to take 4 days before it comes in. Common thing 10, 15 years ago, I used to see a lot was repair deductibles in a lease. So landlords thought that would be a good way to cut down on tenants submitting repair requests. A repair deductible would be something like, okay, Mr. Tenant, you pay the first $75 of any service call, and me as the landlord, I bear the rest of it. You don't want tenants not reporting things that are wrong with your house. You don't want them not reporting that leaky kitchen sink because they don't want you to charge them $75. They move out 8 months later and you've rotted out all your cabinets and you have mold. Bad idea. Emergencies, much like protected classes, can vary a bit by municipality. Generally in Texas, what's accepted: lack of hot water, lack of heat when it's less than 50 degrees outside, a water leak, a sewage backup, or no functioning toilets. So if it's a studio or a 1-bath apartment and the one toilet is broken, that's an emergency. You have a 3-bathroom house and 2 are working, you don't have to treat that as an emergency. Different municipalities have added to that list. Austin just recently added one around air conditioning. So just know and understand where your house is and any wrinkles beyond federal or state law. Okay, so that's more on kind of operating the house. We're going to shift gears into maybe the business side of things. Pretty common question from a lot of landlords is, hey, should I form an LLC? Should I transfer over my house from my name personally to an LLC? My answer for most landlords with a single or even a couple properties, it's not worth it. Why would I say that? Moving the house to an LLC will trigger the due on sale clause in your mortgage. So every mortgage has a provision that says, hey, if you sell the house within 30 days, you have to pay off the mortgage. All right, that's what happens at every closing at the title company. Moving the house from Tim Hendricks to Tim's LLC, that's a sale. That will trigger the due on sale clause in your mortgage legally. Practically, is it likely that the mortgage company is going to know or care if you continue to make payments? It's unlikely. A lot of landlords do it, but they are violating that clause in their mortgage. The lender could call the note and basically say, you have to pay us back, refi the loan, pay it off. But you don't want to put yourself in that position, especially when there's a big rate difference potentially between what you could get now and what your loan is in. Uh, I've heard kind of anecdotally that B of A started getting more aggressive in the last couple of years on this when they're looking at those 2 and 3% notes. They don't want to carry those. I mean, why would a lender want you to continue to have a 3% mortgage? They'd love to force you into refining into a 7.5% rate. Uh, so it's pretty risky. An umbrella liability policy will give you better coverage for less cost typically. If you're not familiar with an umbrella liability, uh, we'll talk about it a little bit more on the insurance section. Um, the other piece with insurance is you run it for an LLC, you run into some issues of you would really need an insurance policy in the name of the LLC. If you leave the insurance in my name and that Tim owns the house, I don't have what's known as an insurable interest in the house anymore. I don't own it, so I can't insure it. So if I then go get an insurance policy in Tim's LLC, one, it's going to cost me more because it's a commercial policy. And then I'm going to raise a bunch of red flags with my lender because they're going to get a copy of that COI and they're going to say, hey, I thought Tim Hendricks owns this house, but I'm getting a COI that says Tim's LLC owns and insures this house. So what's going on? That's what will most likely trigger that mortgage company involvement and potentially that due on sale clause. Lastly, let's say you landlord is comfortable with all of that stuff and willing to roll the dice on those. The vast majority of them are not going to follow all the protocols needed to keep the protection from an LLC. You need to have separate books and records, so you need to have some kind of a bookkeeping system. You can't commingle funds between your business and your personal funds, and there's an annual franchise tax filing with the state of Texas. If something happened that created a liability event, the opposing attorney would try to do what's called piercing the corporate veil. They would say that your LLC is a myth, it's a fiction, and really it's just you. And they're going to look at all of those things and say, okay, well, did you have a separate bank account? Can you show me books? Can you prove this is a business and not just trying to dodge some liability? And if you fail those tests, then your LLC is essentially a fiction and you would still be personally liable. Okay, insurance. Tell your owner they're going to need to talk to their insurance company. It's going to change the type of coverage they have. There's different coverage for a landlord policy versus an owner occupant. A landlord policy generally has zero coverage for contents. You don't own the stuff in the house anymore, right? The tenant owns their furniture and their clothes and their TVs. You just own the house. So you're going to pay less for that policy, right? Because you're not insuring the stuff. Nope. You're going to pay more for it. The insurance companies believe with data that it's more likely the tenant's going to burn your house down than you will. So you can generally expect to pay about 10% more when you go from an owner occupant policy to a landlord policy. Uh, One of the most important things here on this page, renter's insurance, require your tenant to get it. Put that in your lease. That will protect your landlord. If a guest comes over and their dog bites them, you want the tenant to have some insurance. It will generally also um, remove the need to have some difficult conversations. Most tenant insurance policies have coverage for alternative accommodations. So let's say there's a water leak and you need to get water extraction and the house isn't livable for 3 days. Do you want to put the tenant up in a hotel? Do you want to abate their rent? It's much easier to say, hey, call your renters insurance company. That's, you've got coverage for that. They'll pay for a hotel for you. So umbrella liability, if you don't have one of those already, even if you don't own a rental property, I would strongly suggest you get one. It's also called excess liability. So most of us, I would assume, all own cars here, and you have some kind of liability limit on your car insurance. Maybe it's 100,000, 250, 500,000. If you have a typical homeowner's insurance policy in Texas, you probably have $300,000 in liability. An umbrella policy sits on top of that. So it's only going to come into play if your base liability is exhausted. So, you get sued in a car accident and you're found a judgment against you for $2 million. Your auto insurance policy has a $300,000 limit. So they're paying their 300,000 and they're done. At that point, your umbrella liability steps in and would pick up the gap. 1 million is generally the lowest coverage limits, but you can get, 5, 10, 15, $20 million of coverage. It's very cheap because they're in that second line of defense. They're only going to pay if your first coverage is completely exhausted. I generally see about $300 a year for a $1 million umbrella liability that will cover 2 cars and a house. That umbrella covers basically anything that you would create risk for you. Uh, so think like cars, boats, ATVs, houses, all of that. On my umbrella, each time I add a rental house, it costs me an extra $6 per year to the umbrella liability. Very, very low. Adding a car, a boat, more expensive. Then you're talking maybe a couple $100 a year because they realize a car is more likely to create a big liability event than a rental house. But uh, even if you just have even if you don't have any rentals, I think it's just such a low cost insurance policy that everybody should have one. And if you do have a rental property, it's deductible against your rental income. So income. Let's talk about taxes, and maybe I should have read my disclaimer earlier on insurance, but I'll definitely hit it here. I'm not a CPA. I'm not a licensed insurance agent. This is for informational purposes. Definitely refer your clients to their CPA or a tax advisor, an insurance agent for more specifics. Uh, but for an accidental landlord, in most cases, owning a rental property will not trigger tax liability for them. You want to make sure they record the date that they place the property in service. That's an IRS term, and basically that's the day that all of your expenses move from the personal side of the spreadsheet to the business side. So your mortgage, your property taxes, all those recurring bills, let's say you've been living in a house for 5 years, those are just your personal bills. The day you decide this house becomes a business, that's the in-service date. And then your mortgage interest, your property taxes, your HOA dues, all of that becomes tax deductible. Uh, but that the date that it happens isn't the day that you move a tenant into the house. It's the in-service date, basically when you've converted that asset from a personal asset to a business asset. Um, there can be some easy ones. Listing the house for lease, obviously, that's at that point you've decided to convert it. Maybe it's the first conversation when you go and present a CMA with your owner and say, "Here's what I think the house will lease for, and here's all the make-ready work that we need to get done to get it ready." That's a pretty clear indication. But your landlord should, pick and record that date, and that's the magic date that everything after that becomes a deductible expense. Depreciation. We'll uh, try to hit this at a fairly high level. It's one of my favorite things in the tax code. The IRS says every business asset will become useless over a certain amount of time. So regardless of whatever it's worth now, let's take, I forget the name, the new building they're building in downtown Austin that's going to be like 1,000 feet tall. They could have spent $500 million on that thing, and according to the IRS, it's going to be worth zero in 40 years. All business assets have a useful life, and you depreciate their value over that fixed time period. So for residential rental property, it's 27 and a half years. So the IRS says, okay, if your house today, the improvement is worth $250,000, you divide that by 27 and a half, which is $9,091, and the IRS says you're losing $9,091 a year in depreciation, that house is becoming less and less and less every single year until it gets to zero. That's only on the improvement, not the land value. The land stays the same. But why do I love depreciation? If we look at the sample P&L, is because it's a non-cash loss that you're going to take on your taxes. Let's say you rent your house $2,000 a month. You're going to generate $24,000 a year in income, and you have $20,000 in expenses. So you have some mortgage interest, you have some taxes, you have some commissions, you have some repairs. Before depreciation, you would have $4,000 in profit, right? I generated $24,000 in income. I had 20 grand in expenses, $4,000. Uh, if without depreciation, you'd be paying taxes on that $4,000. But in reality, the IRS says, nope, nope, nope. You didn't make $4,000. You actually lost $5,091 because we're deducting that depreciation. Uh, so for most landlords with a mortgage on their property, uh, that they haven't owned it for 10, 15 years and their, cost basis is really low relative to their rental income, uh, they will show a loss every year on their rental property because of depreciation. Won't get into all the details, but a lot of those losses, may not be able to be realized in a given year. They won't owe any taxes, and they'll have what's known as carry forward losses that basically live in a bank on your tax return until you sell another investment or have something else that generates a gain. And then you have this bank of losses that you can use to offset that gain. Um, Again, if you're not comfortable with this, I would not get into a ton of detail with your clients, but just let them know, or hey, it's unlikely there's going to be an income tax impact on them owning a rental property. Uh, Real estate is very tax advantaged. Uh, if you do have a accidental landlord, this is probably one of the most important things to be aware of and talk to your landlord about. There's what's known as a capital gains exclusion. So capital gains is when you sell a business asset, you have to pay taxes on the gain that you've made on that asset. So let's say you bought a house in 2018 for 200, you sold it for 350 in 2025. You paid some commissions, you had some other repair expenses. You might have a taxable gain of $125,000. Depending on your tax bracket, if this was just a business asset, you might be looking at paying a tax bill of $18,750. Uh, the really good news is that for your primary residence, the first $250,000 of taxable gains if you're single, $500,000 if you're married are exempt from capital gains tax. So your landlord's married, they could have bought the house in 1990, lived in it for 30 years, not as a rental, sold it. Maybe they bought a great place in Hyde Park for 200, they sold it for 650. That $450,000 gain is not taxed. That's only on your primary residence. How does the IRS define the primary residence? You have to have lived in the house for 2 of the last 5 years. 2 of the last 5, not the most recent 2, just 2 of the last 5. So for an accidental landlord, that means they could lease out their house for 3 years. They could then sell it after 3 years, and they would still be eligible for that capital gains exemption. If they decide, hey, I'm going to rent it for 4 years and then sell it, that exemption is gone. In this scenario we looked at, that could be an extra $19,000 in taxes because they decided to rent the house for 4 years instead of 3 years. For a lot of the accidental landlords I'm seeing that they bought in 21 or 22 at the peak of the market and their house is actually worth less now than what it was when they paid for it, this may not be an issue. But if you've got somebody that bought pre-2020 and has a significantly lower cost basis, again, not saying don't rent out your house, but suggest they consult their CPA and say, hey, there's this thing around capital gains. You may want to think about only renting it out for 3 years, but talk to your CPA, get some tax advice. Sorry, there's a question in the chat on insurance. Their suggested minimum for renter's insurance policy. I would say $100,000 in liability. That's a base level for most renters insurance policies. That's the most important thing to you as a landlord, is that they have that liability coverage. The other components would be contents. I don't really care, what the tenants insure their stuff for. They know how much their stuff is worth, and their couches, their clothes, their TVs. So I would not suggest trying to put in a minimum, but most renters insurance policies, like the lowest levels, would be maybe $10,000 in contents and $100,000 in liability. All right. Last tip, is your head spinning? Like, outsource this. give it to us. I'm happy to have these kind of conversations. This is what I love doing. Talking with new owners, talking investment strategy, offering up our Rolodex, whether that's tax professionals, 1031s, insurance agents, anything else. Uh, we pay a referral fee to you when you send a client to us, and we will send them back to you when it's time to sell. We keep in our CRM where we received any management lead from. Um, I've been doing this over 15 years and want to do it for at least another 15 years. I'm not going to ruin a relationship with an agent or a brokerage trying to poach a sale from you. It's a long-term game. I think property management is really insurance against bad outcomes. I mean, there's certainly some call it outsourcing of labor involved in property management, but there is a big insurance component. Uh, if you think about what does property management typically cost relative to other assets, if you invest in a hedge fund, 2 and 20 is their usual rule. They charge 2% of the asset value every year as a management fee. REITs, commercial real estate, so the people that own like an HEB shopping center, typically 1.5 to 2%. Insurance in Texas, and I think I put the slide together about a year ago, average about 1.3%. It's probably a little bit higher than that with what's been happening in insurance. Wealth management, you go and hire a money manager, you're going to pay a point to point and a half. Um, our costs generally work out to be about 0.5%. So pretty low in terms of percentage of the asset value on an annual basis. And if you think about what kind of expenses a landlord could incur, again, this insurance stuff, uh, when you have a fair housing complaint, it's very easy for the landlord to, say, hey, I'm Teflon. This is not sticking to me. The property manager over there, they made the tenant selection. I didn't know anything about it. They signed the lease. Like you have zero exposure there. An eviction, you go and hire an attorney. You're going to pay, I'd say, if you're lucky, probably 2,000, upwards of $3,000 to $4,000. And again, it is going to happen. It's just a numbers game. If you're in the rental property business long enough, you're going to have an eviction, you're going to have a security deposit dispute. I get sued 2 or 3 times a year over security deposit disputes. Have never lost one. We're probably in eviction court 6 to 8 times a year. Those are services that we provide as a property manager, and generally there's low to no incremental cost for an owner. Uh, the last thing is, from a repair standpoint, I know you guys all have great Rolodexes being in the real estate business, but we contract out millions of dollars a year of work. So we have great relationships with roofers, with HVAC, with handymen. I'll tell owners if we need to replace your roof, our services are probably free for a year because I'm going to generate enough savings on that roof replacement to offset my management fees for an entire year. Um, but it's about peace of mind, but it's also what is your time worth as an accidental landlord? Do you really want to deal with all of this stuff or hand it off to somebody else? If you guys have questions, my contact information is on here. And I appreciate all the questions that have come in the chat. But I'll pause and take a breath here. And if there's any other questions that we want to chat live about, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'll just reiterate for those of you who don't know or who are new to the brokerage and watching the recording later on, we do not do property management as agents in this brokerage. You can self-manage your own properties, but as agents, we are not property managers. So we can get them leased and then we hand them off to the owner to self-manage or talk to Tim. But Tim's got a phenomenal staff. I vetted him pretty hard before I brought him to you guys. So I'm really impressed with what they're doing and highly recommend them. Any other questions, guys, that you have for Tim? Tim, share with us the areas you cover.
Sure. And I appreciate the kind words. Thank you, Carlin. Yeah, and most you guys aren't unique. I'm sure you know this, but for the agents on the phone, like Keller Williams, Compass, all those, nobody wants to touch property management. Any brokerage says these guys are crazy. Let's give it to somebody else. We will cover like central to North San Antonio, all the way up to Georgetown. So we have 5 property managers. They each kind of live in the areas where they work. Beverly Ortiz, who some of you might know, that used to be with Prosper, she covers Butte Kyle for us. We have someone else that does like San Antonio, New Braunfels, Central Austin, northeast suburbs like Hutto, Pflugerville, Round Rock, and Northwest, Cedar Park, Leander, Liberty Hill. More or less 29 in Georgetown is kind of our northern border. We won't go into Bell County. We don't do Jarrell or Salado. So anything Georgetown, east west, we cover Bastrop, we cover Dripping Springs, we'll go to Lago Vista, we do Manor. Um, haven't gone out to Elgin, kind of prefer not to. But for the right referral, if you've got a multi-property owner, if you're starting to send us a lot of business and say, hey, I've got this client, the house in Elgin, really appreciate it if you can help us out. We're willing to look at anything. We just took a property in Canyon Lake. That's probably half an hour from any of our other doors, but for the right door and the right owner, we can stretch a little bit geographically. Um,
That's great. Talitha asked, what are your fees?
Sure. So 3 fees you'll typically see from us, a leasing commission, a management fee, and a lease renewal fee. I think from a variety of regulatory reasons, I'd rather not just state those and have them published and recorded. Uh, but I'm happy to provide a quote or have a one-on-one conversation after. But they're how about I tell you this? In general, most property managers are charging somewhere between 7 and 10% of rents collected for a management fee, somewhere in the 75 to 100% of 1 month's rent for a leasing commission. I'd say those are pretty good marketplace averages, and our fees generally fall within those ranges. There's some variability based on the price point of the house, as well as the number of properties that a given owner has.
That makes sense. Thanks. All right, guys. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll let you all jump off. No? All right. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for sharing your time with me. If other questions come up, I'm happy to be a resource on anything leasing related. I know it's not a practice that a lot of agents spend a lot of time with, and it operates fairly differently. So only a phone call away if I can ever be of help.
Great. And I'll get the slide deck from Tim and we'll post it on Hub and then get this recording posted on the portal as well. All right, guys. Have a
Thanks,
good
everybody.
day. We'll see ya.